What is going on out there, world? It's your boy Tommy on the spot. 1 week from today is the Royal Rumble 2020, the first pay-per-view of the millennium. And if we rewound back 20 years to the year 2000, the first pay-per-view of that millennium was the Royal Rumble 2000, which is the show that we are going to talk about today. And I'm delighted to be rejoined back here by friend of Watchalong Wrestling, Steve. Steve, how's it going?
It's going great down here. Yeah. How about you?
Not too bad. Not too bad. It's a brisk 20 degrees here in New York City, so it's definitely freezing cold. How is it in Orlando?
Right now, it's probably in the mid 60s. We're supposed to get into the 80s, but we are going to be hitting that cold front that you guys are expecting. So we expect it to get down into the 50s.
Which is crazy. Yeah, it's bitter cold here in the wintertime, and we hope all of you guys are doing well out there. And I give Steve a lot of credit for this show, actually. He and I were kind of talking. Now, both of us were at the Royal Rumble 2008, which, coincidentally enough, was also held at Madison Square Garden. That famous show where John Cena returned at number 30. Jeff Hardy took on Randy Orton for the world title. And we were talking about doing that show, and then it was kind of given an idea that, hey, Steve gave me the idea that, hey, it's the 20th anniversary of the Royal Rumble 2000, and I think it's a great one, Steve. I'm excited to talk about this show.
Yeah, I'm really excited. This is probably one of my favorite shows ever.
Yeah, and I before we even get to the show, just to kind of paint the picture of like what WWE is going through here in 2000. And all of these things will tie in and kind of weave together throughout the episode here. But in November of 1999, WWE kind of soft launched the WWF New York, which was the wrestling-themed restaurant outside of right in the middle of New York City by Times Square. And so what that meant was that their grand opening of WWF New York took place on January the 19th. So this is right before this show. This show, Royal Rumble 2000, takes place January 23rd. So just 5 days before that, they have their grand opening in New York City. Huge deal. All the WWF superstars are there that are like not injured, right? And we'll get to that in a second. But The Rock is there. All the wrestlers are there. They had a big party. Sugar Ray, Mark McGrath performed at that show. Were you a Sugar Ray fan growing up, Steve?
I think a little bit. It wasn't one of my top bands, but it was like, oh yeah, Sugar Ray does that song. I like that song. It's all right. Yeah,
it was one of the first albums I got as a kid. Was that the album with Fly on it?
Okay, yeah.
And the album itself is like, they're actually like, at the time they were actually like a pretty decent punk rock band. So if you listen to their music, it was like very raunchy and loud and pretty vulgar. So at the time I got the CD, I'm like 10 years old. And the parents were none too pleased when they walk into my room and I'm playing all the album tracks that have tons of cuss words on it, and pretty interesting. But Mark McGrath at that point in time was like about as big a celebrity as you could possibly find.
Yeah, I feel like looking back at 2000, like it's weird how like all of the people that are almost practically on the show are household names now.
Yeah.
And before it was like they were, some are like kind of just starting to rise up. Some are at the peak of their popularity and stuff. And so it's been really interesting to look back and watch the videos and watch all of this stuff.
Yeah, it really is. It's crazy. And so that restaurant literally is like a walk and a snowball's throw away from MTV Studios, which at this point is about as big as you can get. This is like right in the peak of TRL. So many a time through high school, whenever there was any time, it would be go to TRL, go to WWF New York. Even my good buddy Dave Bass and I once went, and he probably was the only person to ever order shrimp scampi from WWF New York. Yeah, but so it was interesting. And so that was like the thing to do when we were kids. And then eventually they turned it into more of a nightclub and kind of aged us out because we were only like 12, 13 years old, and you couldn't get in unless you were like 21 at that point. So, and that kind of led to the demise of WWF New York, kind of changing from that to WWE The World and more of like that nightclub setting. So it was a little tough. Also, right after this show, so this show, well, I guess we should, before the show even begins, Stone Cold Steve Austin is injured on this show. He gets taken out November 1999 when he's hit by a car by Rikishi, who was doing it for The Rock. And he's gone. So he has surgery I want to say November 11th, 2000. So this is 2 weeks prior to the Royal Rumble. He actually has that neck surgery, so he is not a factor. And the hope is that he'll be back in time either for WrestleMania or right after WrestleMania. If you remember, Stone Cold at this point is the biggest star in WWE. I mean, he's won the previous. He won 2 out of the 3 previous Royal Rumbles. 1999, he's in the final 2 with Vince McMahon and loses. But he is like a big deal. Were you a Stone Cold fan at this time?
I would say definitely, yeah. I mean, again, if you think about it, when I was like 12, 13 years old, number one is this is peak WWF fan and just overall wrestling fandom for me. I have everything. I got T-shirts, action figures, video games. I bought all of the albums, all of like when they would release, for like all the entrance music and all that stuff. I was, completely 100% all in. And being like a 12 or 13-year-old, I feel like it, you always gravitate towards those kind of badass guys, and there's no bigger than Stone Cold.
Yeah, 100%. And I think this was an interesting time for WWE because not only is Stone Cold out, but despite being on the poster for Royal Rumble 2000, which actually you can go ahead, I just threw that poster up on my Twitter at Watchalong Tommy. It's a new Twitter handle. I was at Watch WrestlePod for a while. Then I was like, I'm not a podcast. I think when I first started this YouTube channel, I think my plan was like, I'm gonna have a weekly podcast. I'm gonna have a YouTube channel. Then I was like, I don't really need, my whole thing with this is like, I don't want to do something. And I know people have like reviewed shows, but like my experience and our thoughts on the shows are different than folks who have like been there. So I do think it's different. I don't want it to be like, hey, listen to me review Raw when 5,000 people other than me have already reviewed Raw. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah. So that's why I got rid of the Watch WrestlePod handle. It is now Watchalong Tommy. And follow me over there. But I threw up the poster to the show. Undertaker's on the poster, but despite being on the poster, he's not on the show. He's in the process. He's injured, taking some time off, and Undertaker is in the process of transitioning from the dead man to the American Badass, the original American Badass.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I see him on the poster. I'm like, wait a minute, he wasn't on the show. He was nowhere near the card.
Yeah,
it's like, oh yeah, that's right. This is also around that time where he transitions, and when he comes back, he's coming out to Kid Rock and on the motorcycle and everything. And
yeah, he had a couple transitions. It was like he came back as American Badass with the long hair, with the listening to Kid Rock, and then I think probably Kid Rock wanted way too many rights fees, so they changed it over to him with the shorter biker hairstyle, him coming out to Limp Bizkit.
Yep. Rolling. And then it was always, I remember, because this, right after 9/11 as well, a year or so afterwards, and he always comes out with like with the American flag, and like he's patriotic Undertaker.
Oh yes,
a really interesting dynamic.
Big Red, and he had the that music that was like "Dong Dead Man Walking," and then
that one,
weird country twangy type music, Undertaker, really at that point, I was pretty convinced, like 2002, 2003, when he's still the American Badass, or Big Red at this point, I was like, Taker's winding down. He'll only be around a year or two more.
And yet 20 years later.
And he's still going. So, so he's out of the show. Austin's out of the show. So this was an interesting time for WWE because now they have to, hey, all the guys who are like, your A level as opposed to your 1As, they need to now step up and become those 1As. And it's interesting to see kind of in the Royal Rumble how 2000 is seen as this huge year for WWE and where everybody's popular. But like going back and watching the show, you can see that like a lot of people are kind of just getting their start. So in the first 6 months of their reign at this point, you have Chris Jericho, who just came over from WCW.
Mm-hmm.
You have the Hardys and Edge and Christian, who have obviously they've been around, but now they've kind of built themselves back up, and they're now perennial players in the tag team division. Certainly the Hardys, who are like their popularity is real. They're like super cool and really young guys that I think they had that weird deal where like they're one of the few acts where like guys thought they were super cool, and then the women and children still thought they were super cool, which was like very few people at the time who kind of fit that mold.
Right. Well, it was that very, like guys liked them because they were like that, like cool and edgy, and they did a lot of like, a lot of their stuff it was hardcore stuff, and it was acrobatics, and the TLC matches, and then all of the girls were always like, fighting over which one. It was like Jeff or Matt, like which one is cuter. And then eventually and then you eventually throw Lita in the mix too, and it was just like it was this perfect combination of people and talent and everything.
Yeah, it really was. And then so you had You had that. You had the Dudleys, who just came over from ECW.
Mm-hmm.
They're just
who are
getting
also
started.
like writing ridiculous popularity because everybody that followed ECW loved them.
Yeah. You had the Acolytes, who had now transitioned into the APA. So they went from like two big brolic dudes walking around as henchmen for the Undertaker with like weird writing on their chests, looking like just like no personality, but like badass guys, to now like beer swelling APA protection agency, like really cool tag team who are now propelled to that next level as well.
Yeah, and they were also like they were one of those like face tag teams that it was like it was a different kind of tag team. Where like the Hardy Boys were that kind of extreme edgy kind of tag team, and the APA were just the brawlers, and they were like, if we need muscle, that was their whole gimmick was you need muscle, you bring these two guys in.
Yeah, exactly. And then you had Rikishi and Too Cool, who were the reimagined team of Too Much. Brian Christopher and Scott Taylor, who had been there forever, now were rechristened as Grandmaster Sexay and Scotty Too Hottie. And Rikishi, who was the rechristened Fat 2, who had about 5 different characters. He was Fat 2 in the Head Shrinkers, Make a Difference Fat 2, the Sultan, and now here he comes, and now he's a dancing big guy who, when he first debuts, I think is the returning Yokozuna. So I had
pretty much
no idea it was Rikishi. It was actually Fat 2, and now they're like become super popular as well. And then right after this show is on January 23rd, January 31st, a week later, the Radicals debut for WWE. Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, Perry Saturn. So you had an influx of just new and exciting talent that one way or the other just seemed like everything they did clicked and really got to that next level.
Yeah, and I mean, I think are we going to like run down the matches and kind of like?
Yeah, we are going to run down the matches. Before we do get there, though, I wanted to also touch that right after, so January 31st is the Radicals come. To give you an idea of how insane this time is for WWE, January 19th, WWF New York comes. January 23rd is the Rumble. 31st, the Radicals come. February 3rd or 4th, Vince McMahon announces the launch of the XFL. So it's like they have so much. And I think that's kind of how WWF takes a little bit of a backseat here in the next upcoming years, because they're so hot in popularity that there was so much going on and almost too much. And ironically enough, we are sitting here about 3 weeks away from the next launch of the XFL 20 years later.
Yeah, it's weird how time is cyclical like that. And well, I think, it was around this time where, there were certain things where Vince was maybe flying a little bit too close to the sun here, with, in regards to XFL and the WWF New York and that kind of thing. But you can't blame him, because this is hands down the heights of the WWF. This is like pinnacle stuff. Like, it cannot get much bigger than this. So you gotta milk it when you can, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, they're even piloting and we'll get to this here in a second, a radio program, which they do here launch the day before Royal Rumble from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern on Westwood One Radio, which was throughout the entire United States. Here in, I believe, here was the WFAN in New York. So, and I did listen to that. So let's get into it. So before we start about the actual show, Steve, were you at this show, or do you remember even thinking about going to this show?
I think we may have talked about it with my cousins, but I think tickets may have been a little bit too out of our price range for a bunch of, young teenagers.
Right.
So it was very popular that I would go over to my cousin's house and we'd watch it. And, this was also in the height of us, doing like the picks for, like who we thought was going to win the matches and that kind of stuff. So the Royal Rumble is also always a unique one, because with the Royal Rumble match itself, you never knew who was going to be in it, or who was going to win or anything like that. So it was definitely, again, like, because of, mostly due to my cousins, but also my own, pursuits, the height of us getting together and talking about wrestling and watching it and doing all those things.
Yeah. I think when we started becoming like good friends, I want to say it was like 2002, 2003.
Mm-hmm.
I think you at this point were transitioning from watching every pay-per-view with your cousins, and I was transitioning from watching every pay-per-view with my family. So you would then only go to see the big shows with your cousins, and I'd go with like the big four with my family, and then
no pun intended, right?
And then we'd connect and order like every little tiny Like,
yeah, the in-between ones. Yeah.
exactly. Like we'd watch like New Year's Revolution and like December to Dismember, and that went on for many years. We watched like
Yeah.
literally every single. It didn't matter the card. If it was total crap, we'd order it and go from there. So so this show
you know, if it was an hour and a half long pay-per-view, like the first ECW one was.
Oh, I think the pinnacle of it was when we got, I think it was November 2006, and I want to say there was like 1 week it was Survivor Series, the next week it was December to Dismember, the week after that was like some TNA show that was main evented by Samoa Joe and Kurt Angle, and the week after that was Armageddon, and we watched every single one of those shows at $50 each, and we ordered them. I mean, like, insane. So yeah, totally different time. But this show you watched with your cousins back in 2000?
Yeah, definitely.
That's really cool. Yeah, me. So my adventure here, to kind of break this down. So I am with my cousin and my sister. It's a week or two before Royal Rumble. I want to say it's the week before the Royal Rumble. And we know now at this point, I'm like 13-ish. And so I'm aware, maybe 12, 13, somewhere around that age. I'm aware that you can go to these shows. Like you're allowed to you can get tickets. This starts to become like, this is my entire idea of life. I want to go to the show. I want to go stand outside, but I'm still like a couple of years too young to do this. This would be the last time that happened, because in 2002, when SummerSlam Survivor Series came around, it was like no messing around. I'm going to go stand outside. And I'm going to get these tickets. But at this point, I'm still a little too young. My parents are having none of it. So we're sitting around, and I literally, birthdays in October, that was I want Rumble tickets. Christmas time, I wanted Rumble tickets and never got them, which is what my parents couldn't figure out a way to get them, because this was before the days of like eBay, StubHub, where like if you really want to go, you just pay an absorbent amount of money and you can go. At the time, though, that wasn't an option. So this was a very sold out show. WWE's at the peak of their popularity. The Garden isn't like a huge venue. I think it's like I think this show does like $1.1 million at the gate, which is insane. And it's about 16,000 paid. The announced attendance was like 19,000. So it's very interesting that, the show was just you could not get a ticket to the show. So a week before the show starts, I get we're down there at my cousin's house, and we get a text, and it's a fax, not a text. Didn't get a text at the time. We got a fax, and a fax comes in, and it's from The Rock, People's Champ himself, Dwayne Johnson, biggest movie star in the world, faxes us and lets us know that he's just met up with my Uncle Tony, and he's given us 4 tickets for a private suite for the Royal Rumble in 2000. So we're losing our mind. Like, we're the most happy kids on the planet of Earth. We're high-fiving, we're pumped. Week leading up to the show, that's the only thing we're talking about. It's literally like walking into the living room, and my sister goes, "Hey, what if Jeff Hardy jumps off the top of the rafters of Madison Square Garden and hits a swanton bomb?" I'm like, that's pretty cool. What if they film something outside, though, when he does one right outside of the Long Island Railroad by Penn Station? Like, we're that excited about this. We're like so pumped. And week comes by. We're listening to the night before they did that radio special, which I think they did a second time. I think we were piloting it to see if it would be popular. And it was built around like a chat they had with Stone Cold Steve Austin about like his surgery. And I remember listening to that, just getting really amped for the Rumble. They actually were doing Taz teases throughout the special too, where like the beeping noises would happen, and they'd be like, "What's going on?" This, that, and the third. I don't know.
I absolutely remember that, because it would be when you're watching TV every so often, like all of a sudden it would just be in the middle of a match or like in the middle of some sort of like ad or something, and all of a sudden just everything would turn orange.
Yes. Yeah.
And there'd be like that weird symbol, his symbol that like would come up, and then that's it.
Yeah, and then it would just end, and it looked like the screen was going to explode, but then it just stopped.
Yep.
And it was right after the Jericho countdown to the Millennium Clock, so like at that point, those types of stuff were really exciting. But yeah, so they did that during the radio show. We listened to it the night before. We were like amped as can be. Sunday morning, my uncle walks back in. He has the tickets in his hand. He mentions that, ironically enough, him and The Rock met for coffee that morning, the day of the Royal Rumble 2000, right for The Rock's biggest match at this point, probably in his career. He meets with my uncle for coffee and gives him the tickets in hand. Shame that he didn't invite us to do that. It would have been fun. My uncle comes back in like the conquering hero. We're all pumped up. He hands us the tickets. My sister's jumping up and down. my cousin who's like 5 is maybe 7 is jumping up and down. I look at the tickets and see 4 tickets to Monday Night Raw, February 22nd, 2000, and I cried. Pretty bad. And I was like, this isn't. I think he gave you the wrong tickets. You should go back. And he tries to call the guy. Of course, the guy's at this point, no way he can get in touch with The Rock. Rock is getting ready for his match, and at this point,
yeah, of course,
yeah. So Malgo was screwed pretty bad. So we did not go to the Rumble. Now, to make things up for this, they ended up taking us to WWF New York, and so we went to WWF New York. Not to watch the show because that was already sold out too. Because you could pay a certain amount of money to get into WWF New York to watch the pay-per-views, which was really the point of WWF New York. Was like you can go there, watch the pay-per-view, watch Raw. You can watch SmackDown live, which was a big play for them because usually SmackDown was recorded.
Right.
But you had to pay, certainly for the pay-per-views, you had to pay a certain amount of money to go because there was also a wrestler there. Like they'd always show WWF New York kind of during the show. They'd go there and there'd be someone there. And on this show, it's actually Linda McMahon who was live at Royal Rumble 2000 from WWF New York. So there was always someone there. We didn't go for that. We just went kind of for lunch and I give them credit for trying to make the best of it. I was being a spoiled brat kid who was actually the worst part of his life. Also because kids I knew who were going to the Rumble were also going to WWF New York to get themselves ready for the Rumble.
Right.
So I'd see them. They'd be like, "Oh, where are your seats?" And then I'd lie and say, "Oh, way up in the rafters." But did not get to the.
You didn't say, "My uncle knows The Rock. We have the press box." Like,
and we did legitimately have the box and did go to that February 22nd Raw. And it was fun. But it was something where like the patience for spoiled me were didn't go. Like, we understand you're disappointed, but if we keep going with this, you're not going to Raw on February 22nd. So I eventually had to get over it. But WWF New York was cool, but I do think they could have done a lot more with it. I remember they had like the store on the first floor where you'd go in. And now it's the Hard Rock Cafe in New York City. So if you ever seen like a Hard Rock, you go in and you see.
Yeah. I was going to say it's that, it sounds like a lot like a Hard Rock or a Planet Hollywood or, like that kind of thing.
Exactly. And then you'd go downstairs and they'd have like a steel cage kind of set up. And some memorabilia, like I remember they had like put your hand on Andre the Giant's hand to see which one was bigger.
Right.
You could like go see if you remember the Headbangers had those like big cones they were using for bras at the time.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah, so you could go and kind of see see that. And then while you were eating, they'd like play Titantron videos. They'd play some old matches, and it was cool. I think they could have done more with it. Probably should have done more with it, and maybe it would have been a little more successful. I also remember the food tasted like maybe it had been wiped across the WWE ring right before it was being served. Nothing was really that good. So, but I mean, the idea that it was like in my backyard, I think I went like 10 to 12 different times, any chance I got. It's a shame it didn't work out, but yeah, so that is happening right there. And to think that's sold out and Madison Square Garden is sold out, which is right up the road, just kind of speaks to the popularity of WWE at the time.
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%.
All right, so now that we've talked about leading up to the show and kind of my personal deal there, let's get into the show itself. So Steve, if you're thinking back to this show, what's the one thing, the number one thing that you take away and remember from this show?
I mean, aside from I always remember as this was the one where the Big Show and The Rock ends the Royal Rumble. And there's this whole thing and with the storyline and the aftermath and everything from that.
Right.
Because also, again, going back to my love of video games and stuff, especially at the time, there was the video game WrestleMania 2000 for N64. And the whole thing is it follows along with this whole storyline where whatever character it is that you picked, it ends up being where, like you win the Royal Rumble, but then the Big Show comes out or whoever it is comes out and says, oh, but look at this. And like I actually won. And then you follow along basically with that same storyline. So I remember replaying this exact scenario in this card and everything like that hundreds and hundreds of times.
That is
because of the video
really
games.
Cool.
So I definitely remember all of this.
Yeah, those video games those games I think are better than, and I don't know the ones today, but your N64 type games, particularly like No Mercy and those types of games are still like the best WWE video games that have ever been made.
Yeah,
For me, I think this show is a show that goes down in history as being the Royal Rumble that is most remembered for things other than the Royal Rumble than any other Royal Rumble in the history of Rumbles. Because I think when you think of this show, you think of Cactus and Triple H in the street fight. You think of the Hardys and the Dudleys in the table match.
Mm-hmm.
You think of Taz's debut.
Yep.
And you probably even think of the Miss Rumble swimsuit contest with Mae Young taking her top off.
Well, and that's like there's no particular thing of this that was like, you know, a forgettable moment, or like a, you know, oh yeah, that was there too, by the way. Every single like, it was such from start to finish, it was such a solid, tight production that it's like there's no filler here at all. It's all 100% meat. And I think that's also probably, I would definitely agree that this is just, you know, there's no weak moment to this.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And so let's get into it here in terms of like the matches kind of going piece by piece here. So first match is your Kurt Angle versus a mystery opponent. And this was building up for a while, as we had talked about earlier, those kind of hype videos for Taz that would come across the screen, and you see the 13, you'd see the orange light, you'd see all this stuff, survive. I think you'd even see like survive, all these things. And people thought for sure it was Taz. And even throughout, Angle comes out for his opening monologue, and people are like, we want Taz from start to finish. Were you an ECW fan at the time?
I wasn't a big, I followed along with it mostly because of like the figures and whatever I would pick up from other things. I was never able to watch an ECW show, you know, but or like go to the shows or anything like that. But I knew a lot of the wrestlers. I knew Taz, you know, I knew about the Dudley Boys beforehand. You know, I think I'm trying to remember if Raven was Raven. He wasn't, I don't think he was Raven at the time, but he was in ECW before he went to WCW, and then before he came.
No, he was Raven. Yeah, no, he was Raven. He was Raven in ECW. Then he went to WCW. Then he returned to ECW, and then eventually returns to WWE. I want to say it's SummerSlam 2000. And he's Raven. He's like this super cool, like badass character. He starts in WWE, and he's like Johnny Polo and a complete nerd. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Completely different character, and you know all that. But yeah, so like, you know, I knew, and you know, like your Lance Storm and Just Incredible, and like, you know, Tommy Dreamer, obviously who we met at one point. And
you got your figure signed.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I knew about all of them, and I was like, oh, you know, this sounds like such a cool thing. And then I also remember at the time that I was not a very big Kurt Angle fan because of his, you know, holier than thou and like, you know, I'm better than you type of attitude and everything like that, and his undefeated streak and you know, all of this stuff. So, you know, knowing that, and, you know, obviously Taz debuting in New York, what better place?
Yeah, and they really luck out big time that it is in New York. I'd say if it's in New York or Philly, it's the greatest, biggest, oh my God moment. If it's in Lexington, Kentucky, he comes out and people are like,
who? Yeah, right. Like, why do we care?
Right.
But yeah, you know, because and so I again, I remember the match. I remember because it was, you know, Taz is the human suplex machine, and Kurt Angle, being the, you know, the technical wrestler that he is, was also big into, you know, suplexes and submissions and all of that stuff. So they were very evenly matched.
Yeah.
And you know, I remember again, this was you know, also I think pinnacle kayfabe, because this is like, you know, Taz hits him with the Taz mission, which Kurt Angle argues later that it wasn't a legal move, and that, you know, his streak is still alive, and blah blah blah, and all that stuff.
Yeah, no, I think you know, that is something where I was the same way. I wasn't like a huge ECW fan. It would air here, I think, at like 2 or 3 in the morning on the MSG networks.
Right.
So whenever I'd have like slumber parties and sleepovers with friends and whatever, we'd always try to stay up for ECW. But the problem would be, many times it was also canceled, and so you couldn't like follow along with the show every week because it would sometimes not be on.
Right.
My friend at the time, Alex, had his mom had like, so remember back in the day with cable, you could actually get like a black box.
Yep.
And see all the pay-per-views and stuff like that. We didn't have it at our house, but he did, and so we watched the pay-per-views and kind of had ECW familiarity from that, from the video game. They had a video game, if I'm not mistaken. And I think like Taz had the same move set as everyone else, but everything was just the word Taz in front of it. Tazplex, Taz Germanplex, Taz, the Kajamana, whatever Taz mission was, and the name of it was at the time. So I knew that, and then obviously the wrestling figures and having the Ultimate so close to our house.
Oh yeah, obviously, yeah, definitely.
Jack, who owned ICW, which is still very popular amongst wrestling Twitter community. He puts on some great shows, and so he always was talking about these. Oh, you got to come to ECW. You got to see ECW. You got to see this. But it was like my parents knew it was violent, so we were kind of like, let's kind of steer away from it. But yeah, when Taz debuts here, it's awesome. It's like the place burnt. Like the Garden is just so jacked. It's like they want Taz, and then when it shows up and it is Taz, people are just losing their mind over it. He beats Angle in a little over 3 minutes, and this supposedly was his call. Apparently, the plan was like they were going to have a good back and forth, and Taz was like, listen, if I'm coming in and you want me to make an impact, I need to have a really strong win. And so he does, chokes out Angle, and this is good because Angle's able to still then be a heel and say he was choked out, it was illegal, this, that, and the third. And yeah, I mean, just a great start to the show. Unfortunately, this was kind of the end of Taz in WWE as well. It's like right where it gets, he has an incredible opener and debut, and then kind of slides back down on the card. And he talked about it on his podcast years ago and said that there's one little slip up in the match with Kurt where he was going for like a belly to back suplex. And he tells Kurt like, hey, stay still while I do this. Let me take you over. Do not jump, like it's going to be fine. He goes through the move. Angle jumps because Angle like, you're going to jump typically if you're going to take the move. So he's used to doing it. When that happened, he had a reset. And it was a little tiny bit of a botch. And he said he knew at that minute WWE lost faith in him, and they did. I mean, he was never the challenging for the title in WWE, despite being ECW champion, having that huge reign.
And I remember as a kid being like, like he had such a huge impact, like he has a huge splash, and he's this like huge force. And I remember like everybody hyping him up, like he's like one of the, like he's got this badass attitude, like the FTW belt, and like all that stuff, and then he comes in and he's completely neutered. And it's so, and he has such a short-lived in-ring career before transitioning to an announcer. And then he has this huge, wildly successful career as an announcer. And, it's like, but I always wondered why it was such a quick transition. Like, did he get injured? What happened? Not understanding that it's a lot of times the time it's politics, and it's like, things like that.
Right. And I mean, I think a big portion of it, and I do remember during his WWE run, and you knew this is like WWE didn't care too much for him at this point, because there was a time when like Mike Awesome was the champion and he kind of held up ECW because he was going to WCW, and he had to return and lose the belt. And they were like, who was he going to lose the belt to that would make fans accept kind of a crappy match? And WWE gave them Taz. And Taz went back to ECW during his run, won the title, and then had the title very briefly. So I think it also had to do with the fact, and I hate to say this, that Taz is a little bit of a shorter guy. And at the time in WWE, if you weren't like over 6 feet tall, you just weren't. Really
No, if you're not a Haas, GTFO, like. Yep,
just didn't happen. So following this match, though, is the Hardys and the Dudleys in one of the most brutal. If you go back and watch this match in 2020, with hindsight being what it is, you will. I mean, it's cringeworthy because it's the first ever tag team tables match, which, I mean, there's probably been in excess of 300 tag team table matches at this point since then. But this is the first one, at least in WWE. And the rules were that you had to put your opponents through the tables consecutively with offensive moves. So they gave up on those rules pretty quick. But it was interesting because it was really violent. This is like when ECW's violence is kind of now WWE's realizing how popular it is and incorporating it to the nth degree in their programming. They've done it in 98, 99, but really right now in 2000 is a big deal. And it's crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, I watched a short video package of all the highlights of all the matches right before, and just kind of refresh my memory. And this match is almost like 75% chair shots, and like them and Jeff like just using his body with reckless abandon, and jumping off of stuff, and using the steel stairs, and the chairs and ladders and tables and like all of this stuff. And it's like, yeah, obviously in hindsight, knowing what we know now about all of the stuff that's been going on, it's brutal to watch.
Yeah, and Dave Meltzer, I was looking up kind of some of his commentary on it with the Wrestling Observer newsletter. He had said, and it was such a good quote, it was like, this point you recognize that the violence is a necessary evil that will bring that short-term gratification, but everybody is forgetting about the future issues that may happen. And if you go down this card, and there's a particular moment in this Rumble, and certainly if you go back and you look at ECW, like how many of these guys 20 years later are not what they used to be, and or have passed on.
I was going to say, for that matter, no longer with us, because
Right.
I'm looking and I'm like, oh yeah, like they're not alive anymore. Oh, they're not alive.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a part of the Rumble where it's legitimately like in consecutive numbers. It's like Viscera, Bossman, Bulldog, Test, and all four of them have passed away. It was like waiting for each one of these guys, and I was like, this is depressing as can be. Like they're all gone, and that sucks, you know?
Yeah, looking at it, like practically half of the entrants to the Royal Rumble aren't with us anymore.
Yeah.
Or maybe more, like actually really thinking about it. Like off the top of my head, I'm looking at it and going, damn.
Yeah. And we can kind of go through that when we get there. But what's crazy, kind of going back to ECW, think about those guys, how many of those guys have passed on.
Exactly, yeah.
All this violence. And then we would have to, because of this violence, kind of have to go crazy with painkillers and all this other stuff. That was
exactly, exactly.
Impact on them, you know? So it's unfortunate, and it's a shame. Of course, doesn't tie too much into the Hardys and the Dudleys, because those guys are, pretty much a lot of them are still wrestling or doing pretty well. Hardys are still in WWE, and Bubba Ray is really successful on Busted Open Radio, and he's in Ring of Honor, and Devon's a producer for WWE. So they end up being a couple of the lucky ones, but in this match, it's crazy.
And especially considering those guys for the longest, between them and throwing in, like you said, Edge and Christian into the mix, their programs, where they're constantly the ones in these matches. They're constantly the ones in the TLC matches and the whatever, all those sorts of variations. Yeah. So they're very, very lucky that they got out and are able to live the lives that they are now.
Absolutely. But a great match, and the famous, and it's been probably, you think about Royal Rumble and the history of Royal Rumble, one of those images that always comes to my mind right away is Jeff Hardy doing the Swanton Bomb off the rafters, off the entranceway with the taxi right behind him.
Yep.
With that famous Madison Square Garden entrance that's like set up right behind where WWE is, and kind of like right behind the ring, so you can kind of see it as the action's going on, and you knew that show was in MSG at the time. So crazy stuff and a lot of fun.
Yeah, I loved the gritty, like because it's in New York, so you got like the back alley entrance and like that kind of thing. I love that. Yeah,
that is really, really missed these days, is those entranceways and those things that have that feel to whatever the show is, that are the entranceways set up specifically to the show, and the sets and everything to that extent.
Yeah, the set design. Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. Like, there was so much you could tell with the set design and with all of that. Like there was so much kind of effort put into that. The scenery and that kind of stuff. And I mean, like you look at, it's almost a weird comparison to draw when you go to a place like. If you go to a place like Disney World or Universal Studios, and like it's all of those places are all set design. It's all so you can draw that comparison to the WWE and how it was basically like a theme park at the time, where it was you take it, and that helps, that scenery and that kind of set design help to bring you out of the this is more than just guys in tights rolling around with each other. Like, this is an actual huge event, and this is a spectacle.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody gave you a snapshot of all these old set designs, you'd see this one. You'd go Royal Rumble 2000. You'd see all the TLC shows where they're coming down and you have all the tables, ladders, and chairs set up. Backlash with like those big kind of
the weird hooky things. Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, that just great stuff. And this is one of the more famous ones. Moving along here, this is certainly. Obviously, now the women in WWE are a huge part of the show. They just main evented WrestleMania. They're having some of the best matches really of up and down the cards, and it's great to see. And that was not the case in 2000, as while China had kind of transitioned and she was doing really well wrestling with in the men's division, pretty much everyone else who was a part of the women's division in 2000, while they'd have some matches here and there, were really on the show for kind of that eye candy type.
Yeah, the eye candy, the valet, the manager type of thing. I mean, if you look it down, pretty much that is that's kind of where they are in that regard, unfortunately. And I look back and I'm like, wow, how that particular part, that is the one thing that I think that there's all this other stuff. And it's like, WWF, WWE isn't the same as it used to be. But this is the one thing where I'm kind of glad has evolved and has changed. Obviously, as a 13 or 14-year-old kid, this was probably one of the things I was most excited about. Not necessarily the ending, ending necessarily, but
well, and I remember my parents at this point, because I grew up as WWE, being a fan in '91, right as I'm born, that area, Hulk Hogan, family friendly, new generation,
sure.
Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart. So they had a tough time when they were transitioned now into this real TV MA type deal.
Mm-hmm.
And the pay-per-view before this, December '99, Armageddon, is when the cat rips off her top and is wearing nothing, full frontal, boom, shows her entire breasts. And as a little kid, I was Jerry Lawler. I mean, I was this is the greatest
right along there with you.
Joy. My parents are turning it off. It's just. But yeah, now it's just I can't imagine this stuff happening on WWE TV now, and it's much better that it isn't there. It's great that now people in the next generation coming up, girls who are coming up can look to the women now in WWE and say, I really want to do this when I go. I want to be the next Sasha Banks, the next Charlotte Flair, the next Becky Lynch, and now they can do that, and they can think hey, I can main event WrestleMania, as opposed to hey, I want to be the next woman in WWE, and maybe I can wear a bubble wrap bikini at.
Right. Yeah. Maybe I can live my dream and be in a bra and panties match, or an evening gown match, or whatever type of weird stipulation Vince comes up with.
Yeah, just so degrading. And this is actually, and so we'll break down the contestants here. This is before Trish Stratus is in WWE. She's coming within the next month or so, and she'll be managing Test and Albert. Do you have the list of women that are up on the screen, Steve?
I do. So the contestants were Ivory.
Okay.
Terry Runnels.
One of the few who really wanted to wrestle, actually.
Yeah, and that's she comes out in the baggy stuff. Everyone else are kind of wearing these terry cloth robes and kind of scandalous and everything. She's wearing this baggy sweatshirt and and you can tell this is obviously pre. I'm trying to think, when it was Stevie Richards and the Good Father and all that, Right to Censor.
Oh yeah.
So this is pre-Right to Censor, but you can tell this is the kind of the antithesis of that, or the predecessor of that.
Yeah.
So there's Ivory, Terry Runnels, who I think is managing Kane at the time.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know what she was at.
Jacqueline.
Yeah. Who had had about 4 or 5 different times where she ended up having her top ripped off during matches.
Yeah. Because Barbara Bush.
Short-lived run for her. She was the EMT. She played the EMT that would come out, so the wrestlers would be being taken away in a stretcher, and you'd have all the doctors there, and then you'd have Barbara Bush. So the crowd would go nuts for her, while poor Mick Foley's being dragged out with a tooth up his nose.
Right.
But she didn't last long because the rumor was that her and Bob Holly were having a relationship while Bob was married, and it just rubbed the wrong way. So
yeah, of course. And then there's Luna.
Okay. Who was married to Gangrel at the time.
Yep. And the cat.
Who was married to Jerry Lawler at the time.
Yep.
And it was really built around her. And then I think she doesn't even last about not even a full year. I don't even think a full year later. She's they said they got rid of her and said they didn't really have anything for her. And that's when Jerry Lawler steps up and says, hey, if she goes, I go. They say goodbye. And they bring in Paul Heyman to be the announcer and take over for Jerry Lawler. And then Lawler would, unfortunately it didn't work out with him and Stacey. She would stand in the cat, Stacey Carter. And then he ends up coming back to WWE and is still there to this day.
Yeah, so I mean, it's weird how like certain politics and stuff like that come into play. And of course, the swimsuit competition proceeds, and as the judges are deciding, none other than Mae Young appears.
Well, just before you get there, I'll let people know. So the judges here, the esteemed panel.
Oh yes, of course, can't forget this.
Yeah, so you have Tony Garea, who at this point hadn't done anything other than being a producer for WWE. Johnny Valiant, Sergeant Slaughter, Classy Freddie Blassie, and the Fabulous Moolah. Now, Edge was tapped to be a judge. He was removed beforehand, and the reason he was removed, we'll get to in a second. But yeah, as Steve continues, yes, Mae Young comes out.
And announces that she wants to appear as well, and proceeds to pull a cat and
and pulls off. She shows up. She's in a one piece, and it's like, all right, fine.
Right.
And then she proceeds, and Mark Henry's in the ring, and he's losing it. And it is actually, this is worth a rewatch just to see Mark Henry is obviously having the time of his life. And he's laughing hysterically, and he's trying his best to cover up Mae, and Mae just whips him out, and you can hear the garden, and what feels like literally 30 minutes. It's probably like 5 minutes, but it feels like 30 minutes she's standing there with nothing on, and they had the big censored like the censored pieces up there, but Mae ends up going past the censor. So you saw everything live on pay-per-view. And if you were in the garden, you got a full Mae Young show for 2-3 minutes.
Right. And good for her for being up for it, I guess.
Yeah, and the rumor is that these actually were not her real breasts. These were like fake, kind of like made to look.
It looked like it. Yeah. I mean, it didn't look like. No, I would hope. Yeah, no, hopefully.
Well,
but anyway,
it's a playoff of, at the time, There's Something About Mary was really popular. And if you remember Something About Mary, there's that scene where they transition to go and they cut like the older lady's breasts.
Yeah. Which
show that they're kind of like, I never thought I'd give a play-by-play here of Mae Young's.
Maybe.
But it is worth the watch. And then, of course, it plays into the fact that all of the judges are in their 60s, 70s. So Mae Young wins the contest, hands down. And then, we move forward, and that's the end of that.
Of course, the next thing up is the probably, I would say, one of it's definitely an interesting match.
Yeah. Is this Jericho?
This is the triple threat match for the Intercontinental Championship. So this is Hardcore Holly with the co-champions of Chris Jericho and China.
Yeah, and it's interesting because at the time Chris Jericho is being brought in, and he has high hopes. They have him tapped to main event WrestleMania that year. Originally, when they came up with the idea for the Fatal 4-Way of WrestleMania 2000, it was supposed to be The Rock, Triple H, Big Show, and Jericho, to the point that if you look for that WrestleMania 2000 book that was released, kind of going through the history of WrestleMania, on the cover of that book is those four guys. Jericho's right there. And, variety of reasons that probably none of which were his fault. He was obviously a little shorter than some of the other guys that were in the company. Maybe that played a role. Vince McMahon just didn't think he was ready for the position and brought Mick Foley out of retirement and replaced him. But one of the things he's doing here is that he and China are your co-Intercontinental champions.
Mm-hmm. And I think I remember. I don't remember who it was that they beat, but there was some sort of match where they pinned whoever it was at the same exact time.
Yeah, they. It was weird, but they end up doing a match for the undisputed Intercontinental Championship, and Jericho wins the belt there. Now he's kind of off to the races, and he's just loved at this point. I remember there was a New Year's Eve special where I think it was called like New Year's Revolution or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was like 11 p.m. to midnight, right before 2000, which, of course, 2000, everyone thought the world was going to end because the computers wouldn't be able to adjust to the 2000 or some silliness. Mm-hmm. And so at midnight, they cut to like a live venue, and Jericho walked out, welcomed us to the new year, and said, year two Jericho, and this, that, and the third. And I remember that. And people were just... Jericho was like your up-and-coming guy who was like super cool, who people were really into. People kind of knew that maybe he wasn't going to be in the world title picture right away, but he was like fun and really cool, and people liked him. He was fantastic.
Yeah. Like he, and I think again, he was fun, energetic, charismatic. He was great on the mic. He was great in the ring. He had this persona, and he had this just all around great character. That again, I mean, it's why he's been able to sustain his popularity until today, even.
Exactly. Yeah, and it is good that eventually he does move up to that next level, obviously in WWE. But in 2000, there was a couple of different start and stops where he ends up really challenging for that world title, and ends up winning the title on the Raw at Penn State, where the crowd just loses their mind, and they come back from the commercial break. They take the belt off him, but he has the belt there for a little bit. He beats Triple H. Then he has those great matches throughout 2000 with Triple H, the last man standing matches. And he was eventually brought up to that next level. But when he first debuts, he's here with China. And in his book, he talked about how tough it really was to work with China, and even mentioned how there's even a spot in this match where, because China was she was doing the best she could, I guess, at the time to kind of wrestle and have these, now she's transitioned fully to just be a wrestler, as opposed to a ballet. She had to have everything mapped out and written out, and so she could memorize everything that was happening in the match, which isn't typically how it goes.
Right.
So they had this one spot where, if you go back and watch it, Jericho can't figure out what the next spot is, and so he just draws a blank, and he blanks out. He can't remember what the next move is that he's supposed to do, but Bob Holly knows it. So Bob Holly screams across the ring, "Bulldog, jackass!" And then he does the Bulldog to China.
In pure Bob Holly form. That is peak Bob Holly.
Yeah. So it was a lot of fun, and kind of an okay match, and then that brought us to the tag team title match between the New Age Outlaws and the APA.
Yep. And again, these are guys that are at the height of the popularity. Where it's again, and that they're I don't think that that DX is a thing right at this particular point, right? It's kind of in one of those in-betweens where it's like the New Age Outlaws, and sometimes X-Pac is in there too with them, but they're not a full stable. It's just kind of like them kind of doing their own thing, if I'm not mistaken.
So they were broken up. So I think what happened with DX, and this kind of is the end of the Outlaws and DX in general here. This is like the tail end of their run. So what happens is they break up, and then they kind of are brought back together with Triple H, Stephanie, and Mean Street Posse, and they're a part of the McMahon-Helmsley era.
Right.
And that's when they had the DX music with Run DMC, the King of Pop. The King. So it was a little silly. And then I think Tori's a part of them with X-Pac, and eventually she's there as well. And if you watch that DX video with Run DMC, Triple H and Stephanie are both in there. But I think what happened was, once they broke them up, it just never really was the same. So even though the Outlaws are the tag champions here, with all these other tag teams kind of bubbling up and coming up to the top there, their run is really towards the end, I thought. And I don't think it ever really was the same once they broke up and kind of gave Billy Gunn that singles run in the summer of 1999. It's The Rock at SummerSlam, and The Rock destroys him, and that's the end of him. So yeah, I do think that they kind of struggle there. And at the end of this year, Road Dogg is gone from WWE, which is crazy to think.
Yeah, it is. And then he shows up in TNA.
Well, yeah. So he did the thing with K Quick.
Right. Yeah.
Get rowdy.
Get rowdy. Yeah.
Horrible. And it was a week or two of that. And I mean, K Quick still in WWE is R-Truth. And then, Road Dogg goes to TNA, and then eventually is joined by Billy Gunn. They become the VKM, Budokan Mafia, which is the take on Vince McMahon.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but glad now they're back in WWE. They're in the Hall of Fame as DX, and Billy Gunn is with AEW, but everyone's doing good, so it's good to see.
And I think are we about to move on to the next match?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes.
We are. Yep.
And again, this was probably riding high cannot get much better than this. Yeah. The Triple H versus Cactus Jack street fight match.
Yeah, it was an incredible match, really violent match, and a lot of people think that, and people give Mick Foley a ton of credit for, there's this scene a couple weeks before this where Mick Foley transitions from Mankind to Cactus Jack.
Yep, I remember it vividly.
Takes off his mask, and he does, and he talks about in his book how he's Mankind's not going to be a part of this match because he's just not good enough for you, Triple H. And Triple H is soaking it up. He's so excited. Yeah. And then he's like, but I found a suitable replacement. And he says how he moves really quick to take off the jacket to reveal the Cactus shirt because he was worried the crowd was going to start chanting for The Rock. And then they'd be disappointed.
Oh, I could see that, yeah. But also, yeah, but I remember him like walking down and like, with each step it was a transition and he hypes it up and hypes it up. And then he reveals that he's got that, the Cactus Jack persona. And then I do remember that there was a very big pop for him revealing Cactus Jack.
Yeah, and I give Triple H a great amount of credit for this because when he rips off the shirt and he's Cactus Jack, Triple H could have very easily just laughed and been like, "Ha!"
Yeah, no, he goes. He looks very scared.
Yeah, and it's a really cool throwback because Cactus Jack's WWE debut took place at Madison Square Garden in 1997 against Triple H, where they fought all around and he like pile drives him through a table onto the ramp and beats Hunter. So Hunter looks really scared, and Hunter does a great job in getting this over. And this, coupled with the next month at No Way Out, which is the Hell in a Cell for Foley's career, I think is what brought Triple H up to the stratosphere of being like the top heel and just at the top of his game. He's just about as good as it gets at this point.
Oh yeah, and I mean, you can pretty much thank Mick for putting him over at this point. Like, it's not necessarily that, obviously for any number of reasons he was there, but to have this program with Mick Foley, Cactus Jack, Mankind, etc. Having that caliber of an opponent where it's like you have to really kind of put that struggle in and that violent, brutal, very visceral kind of struggle with, all of the different spots. Like there was with the barbed wire 2x4 and all of the thumbtacks and like all of the crazy absolute spots that are in this match. Like it's insane to go back and think about.
Yeah, it really, and Hunter, there's a little spot where he does like a suplex to Cactus over on a wooden crate that's in the aisleway. And when he does it, he slices up his leg. And so now not only is he busted open from the head, but he's busted open from his leg. And so that's like, clearly that was hard way. It was not planned at all.
Right.
And it's just like Hunter, and he comes out the next night on Raw. And one of the things that I used to love is next night on Raw, usually they'd come out with like a little Band-Aid.
Yeah.
Triple H comes out. He's just completely bandaged up and he's hobbling around. And it's like, damn, this took a lot out of him. And,
right.
He's had so many. I mean, matches with Austin where he put him over, matches with Taker where he goes off the Hell in a Cell and puts him over. Really is, I think, probably a big part of Triple H's success, a huge part of Randy Orton's success, of Edge's success.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Foley gave just so much back to the business. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of those guys that you can't say enough good things about, I think, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I'll never forget around this time, maybe a year or two after, he was at I think it was in 2000, maybe like right there, or maybe 99. He was signing at the Belmont State Fair. And it was free in order to go. And you go and you got an autograph from Mankind. He's sitting there, and then they asked everybody, like, hey, who's ready for, I'm assuming this was like some show in maybe SummerSlam. And everyone goes nuts and like, and who's your favorite wrestler? And everyone starts screaming, The Rock, Stone Cold, Triple H, blah, blah, blah. And Mankind gets on the mic and he says, I'm sitting right here. Nobody said, it was pretty funny, but yeah, he's great, Mick. I've seen him do comedy, and it's great to see that, sometimes it's sad to see him because he's given so much to the business, and now it looks like, eventually that stuff takes its toll. But
yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, you can't, how do you learn how to fall off a Hell in a Cell? So
it's very true. It's very true. They say they learn how to fall. How do you learn to fall off a 15-foot ladder?
Right.
So it's my JR of the day. But in any event, a great match here. This match, I think, is definitely the match of the show. I always say go back and watch a Rumble because a Rumble can't go wrong. But at this particular event, go back and watch this match. It's just brutal and such a good match. And Foley even talks about in his book that there's a move where he gets, after about 24 minutes, he gets a pedigree. He gets pedigreed middle of the ring. And that was supposed to be the end of the match. He kicked out, called an audible, and told Triple H to pedigree him again into the thumbtacks.
Mm-hmm.
So that it would even be more brutal and show like the depths that Triple H was willing to go in order to get the win. And, it was a good call, and it's something where if you look back, Triple H is like, "What the hell?" Like, and the reason he is because it was supposed to be the end of the match.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's, one of the, he's such a good performer, and he can tell such an amazing story, in both, in the written word, because he's written numerous books.
Yeah.
And as well as, telling a story through a match. So I think that's one of the things where he knows how to tell a good story. So in that regard, being able to put all of these people over, it's one of the things that he's best at.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think looking back, and I've never been a proponent for the Royal Rumble not ending the Royal Rumble show.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, end with the Rumble. Guy wins the match. He's pointing up to the WrestleMania sign. We go home. It's the end of it. But this might have been the one time where it was super tough for them to go to this match and then go, and let's see who drew number one. It's D'Lo Brown. They're literally, as D'Lo's coming to the ring, people are sweeping up the ring still and trying to get all the debris out of the way. And so
and I mean, looking at the first few entrants, I don't know how much you got D'Lo Brown, and then you got Grandmaster Sex A.
What a first two, right? No disrespect to Brian Christopher, may he rest in peace, but usually your number one, number two are your big names, get you pumped for it, and here your number one and two are D'Lo and Grandmaster Sex A.
And not only that, but number three is Mosh.
Right. Well, and I'll never forget, and I was going to play it, but just in the interest of time, I won't. But there's a great promo from The Rock during the show where he's in the back and he's, what is he? They're asking him, hey, are you worried about any two wrestlers in this Rumble? And he says, The Rock is worried about two wrestlers in particular, Crash Holly and Headbanger Mosh. And Mosh comes out, and he's got the big cones on that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Big fuzzy cones. And Thrasher, so this is interesting. This is an interesting tidbit about this Rumble. Thrasher was supposed to be in the Rumble, as was the second half of Viscera and Midian. Midian was supposed to be in there as well.
Right, yeah.
The Mean Street Posse were supposed to be in this match, as was Kai and Tai. Somebody else that ends up being pulled. They pull 8 guys. And the reason they pull 8 guys was because they thought they were particularly low on names in this match. And if you think about those names, Headbanger, Thrasher, Midian, Mark Henry was the other name. There you go. Those types of guys, they pull them all from there and they replace them with everybody who had already fought on the show. So that's how Jericho, China, Hardcore Holly, Outlaws, and APA, and the returning and the surprise entrant, a surprise entrant back in 2000, which was not the norm in the Rumble. Now it's the selling point of the Rumble is let's watch the Rumble and see what surprises are coming.
Yeah, exactly.
But 2000, Mr. Bob Backlund, surprise entry, who was in the process of running for Congress in Connecticut.
I remember that, yeah, and
Well, I didn't win Congress, but what's funny is afterwards he comes to the ring, and when he comes to the ring, he's just marching to the ring. And presidential music, and then he stops and kind of looks around where the hell am I? And the crowd goes nuts for him. And then when he's eventually tossed, he goes up through the crowd because he's still campaigning on the campaign trail.
Yeah,
looking for, I think JR's he's looking for Connecticut registered voters, and so it was kind of a funny little thing there. And having without those guys in there, those guys I mentioned, the only guys that people could even think would be on to win the Rumble legitimately were probably The Rock, Kane, and Big Show, maybe X-Pac because he had gotten number 30 and you knew that ahead of time. But there's such a light, other than those guys who had wrestled earlier, there's a real lightness and star power in this Rumble.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things where, it was kind of at that time, yes, being that 12 or 13-year-old, again, with that mentality of, anybody could win. Right, it's definitely not pre-staged.
Right.
Yeah. Gangrel has a real shot at this.
Yeah, because he's cool. So he's definitely
right. He's cool. So Edge. Oh man, wouldn't it be crazy if Edge won the Royal Rumble?
Yeah.
He's never going to go on to be anything other than a tag team champion, right?
Exactly. And it's so funny because they're in this match, Edge and Christian, and you can tell they're they're almost looks like they're going to be forgotten a bit in the like Hardys and Dudleys are on the rise, and even though Edge and Christian have that great match at No Mercy against the Hardys, they really kind of lacked a bit of personality at this time. So it was still a couple more months before they transitioned here into ENC and really, really popular and
right.
their character and all that. And then they go on to win every single ladder match these three teams eventually have.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So, but I mean, one of my favorite moments is when it's everybody, you know, it's so Grandmaster Sexay obviously one of the first ones, and then Rikishi comes in. Right. And then it's the only two of them, and then Scotty 2 Hotty comes in, and they're the only ones that are there for like a solid minute or so. So they're just dancing. And then Rikishi turns around and just eliminates both of them.
Yeah, it's so I think it was Grandmaster Sexay and Rikishi, and they were still building that at the point Rikishi was like a crazy, ready to just destroy everyone, big brawlic Samoan. But when he got the glasses, he transitioned into like a loving dancing.
Yeah, you know, so, exactly.
So Scotty 2 Hotty runs in, gives Rikishi the glasses, and then because he's about to kill Grandmaster Sexay. But he gets the glasses, and then the three of them have that moment where they actually dim the lights. The music comes on. Scotty does the worm. And I actually thought, because Rikishi goes on to what's commonly referred to as the Diesel spot, which is something that in 1994, Diesel was in the ring for like 10 minutes, eliminating every jabroni that came in there and just threw each person out. And Rikishi goes on a bit of a run here. And I thought it would have been cool to have Rikishi, every time he dumps someone, the lights dim and Rikishi dances by himself in the ring for a little bit. So that would have been cool. But he is definitely another one, kind of likening him to Jericho, where the crowd was ready to embrace Rikishi as a big main event guy because he was cool and he was fun to kind of get behind. In a little while, literally 24 hours later, he's actually in the main event of Raw against Big Show and Triple H teaming with The Rock. So right away, The Rock gets strapped to him.
Yeah, and then, you know, the next three entrants are in there for a combined 3 minutes. Scotty 2 Hotty, Steve Blackman, and Viscera.
Steve Blackman, Viscera, yeah.
You know.
Well, do you know, and you might have it in front of you, but do you know who is the long man in this Royal Rumble?
I do. I was actually very surprised at seeing it too.
Yeah, I saw it. I saw it when I was doing my. It was like one of the first things that popped up when I was doing research. That Test is the guy, the long man here, and Test was always someone where it felt like WWE wanted to get behind him, but just never fully pulled the trigger on it.
Yeah. And however, though, did you also happen to see who number 2 is? Who the second longest one is?
No.
It is none other than Gangrel.
Oh, is it? Okay. Gangrel doing his. Well, I do remember Gangrel comes in and he like immediately like everyone tries to get their shit in, so he comes in, he about faces and spits blood out into the crowd, and then jumps in and does his thing for the rest of the
Yeah. But sandwich in between those two is the British Bulldog, who's at a respectable 15 minutes in this, so that's not too bad. His
final pay-per-view in WWE, it'd be, and I'm pretty sure he's gone and passed away just a couple years later.
Yeah. So, you know, running through, you got Gangrel, Edge, Bob Backlund, who you mentioned, who was in there for 2 minutes flat. You know, you got Chris Jericho, the Elroy Jetson himself, Crash Holly.
Well, he rest in peace.
Yeah. China, Farouk, Road Dogg, Al Snow, Val Venus, you know, and again, like all of those guys, like they're you know, they're kind of solid mid-card names, right? But like you said, like there's nobody that, you know, like in you know, if I was looking at it now, I'm like, none of these guys have any shot at winning this thing.
No.
You know, like I don't think Prince Albert is going to have a shot at winning the Royal Rumble. You know, Hardcore Holly, okay, he was you know, in the Intercontinental title match, maybe.
Right.
Then of course with number 24, the entrance where you got The Rock coming in.
Okay.
And you know, it's like, okay, like out of all of these people that are still in it at this time.
Well, and when Rock comes in, I remember the crowd is like every 10, 9, 8, the crowd starts chanting for him. Like they're building him up. They want him. They're like, God, if it's another Prince Albert, I'm done. Like, I'm going home, you know?
Right. Well, and at this time, partially kind of slightly due to the influence of my cousins not liking him, I was also like, he was, for a lack of a better term, the John Cena of the time, where it was, hugest baby face, like always winning, always doing this, like always up there, always the guy, like, or not like number one, number two. Like you said, like there's no, a lot of this is like a C, maybe a B plus list as far as like the character and the talent.
Yeah.
Rock being an A plus, he was the only real, like, at the time, A plus guy. Then you got Billy.
If you remember, he's pushed so hard. I'm 100% with you that it's the first time in my life where I'm like, I don't really necessarily love the number one guy.
Yeah.
And I remember the next month he faces Big Show at No Way Out 2000 to see who's going to go on and face Triple H. And I'm like, obvious, or Mick Foley, because remember Foley was fighting for the title.
Yeah.
So I remember being like, I really hope Show wins, because if he wins, then Foley's probably going to beat Triple H.
Right.
And Show won, and he won because Shane came out, Rock's doing the people's elbow. Shane comes in, flies in, hits him with the chair, and I just remember being like jumping out of my chair and so excited Big Show beat The Rock. And the crowd eventually catches up to us and is like kind of turns on The Rock, but I too was not like a huge, like, Rock was not Austin to me.
Right. And it's like, I mean, if you think about it at the time, like we had said at the top of the show, Stone Cold and Undertaker are both injured this time. So there is that little bit of, not that The Rock wasn't a huge superstar before this, but there's that vacuum of who's going to be the guy to step up and be that guy while these two other huge A-list talent are injured. And it was The Rock that filled that vacuum. I mean, Triple H and Foley obviously were in there as well, but The Rock is the guy, and I think a lot of that is to thank for there not being the other people to kind of try and fight for that spotlight. Yeah, no,
he's the guy. He's pushed to the moon, and main event of almost every show in 2000. He's right there, and this is the year before the Scorpion King, so he's there all the time, and eventually goes off through Scorpion King, and then he starts to become bit of a part-timer from there, and really after 2002 is never fully in WWE anymore.
Yeah.
So it's pretty nuts. But the other thing I wanted to touch on with the Rumble here is because Main Street Posse and Kai and Tai were not in the Rumble, they kept interfering. Main Street Posse would interfere specifically to counteract the Acolytes at APA and get them out of the match. But Kai and Tai would just do random run-ins. Everyone would stop what they were doing, beat them up, toss them out. And this leads to poor Takumi Shinoku getting tossed from the Rumble and landing like dead smack on his face. And when it happens, like Jerry Lawler just laughs about this, and they replay the clip like 100 times, even though Taka was legitimately injured.
Yeah. And it's Jerry Lawler being Jerry Lawler and, all this other stuff. And and I mean, like, I remember Kai and Tai, like they were, at least in this particular circumstance, they were like almost kind of like a weird comic relief type of thing. And it was like, again, one of those things where it's like looking back, it's like, was this necessarily maybe the best, the most PC move in our particular, and, of course, Vince McMahon being Vince McMahon, wouldn't have ever seen anything wrong with this.
I remember they would do the Takumi Shinoku would come up and he would talk in English, but Funaki didn't speak any English at the time. So Funaki would get on the mic, or if he did, he wasn't. It was presented as he didn't. And he'd get on the mic and he'd do, he'd kind of talk, but you wouldn't hear him. And then they'd do the voiceover, and it would be Bruce Pritchard doing, "Indeed." That's all they said.
Well, there was, it was that Japanese dub thing where it was like he was moving his mouth, but then there was a voiceover, and it was like, "You will never defeat us." And then it would pass the mic over, and you would just go, "Indeed."
So it was terrible. And during this show, they even Jerry Lawler constantly mentions like, "Hey, where are those Chinese guys, Kai and Tai?" Which is like, obviously they're from Japan.
Right. Like, and it's like, all right, come on, like,
awful. So, but yeah, I mean, and then of course the end of this show, the finish is supposed to see The Rock run with Big Show on his shoulder, go to, or is it I guess Big Show's going with Rock on his shoulder. He goes to toss the Rock. Rock's supposed to fall down but hang on to the top rope, and Big Show sails over him. But that didn't really happen.
Right. It's like where they're both supposed to go over the top rope, and then Rock is supposed to hang on.
Yeah.
But it's because as hanging on and like because of everything, like the weight and everything, the rope dips a little bit too low, and his boot like brushes the floor.
Yeah.
And that is the clip that Big Show comes out, and it's like he the next night there's the whole program and everything where he shows the video, and it's like, look right here, look right here, look right here, and it's like replayed over and over again, and it's like, okay, we get it, okay, yeah, all right, fine, yes, we get it, okay.
But it does, and it's funny because, and I showed you the clip, when Rock returns in 2016 to Raw, he sees Big Show, and he like finally admits after all this time that, you know what, you were right, I did lose that Royal Rumble, and says something like, there was someone there to recruit for the lead as the Scorpion King, and when they saw me and you there, they said whoever won this Rumble was going to get the Scorpion King role.
Yeah.
And it ended up being you, ended up being me, when really it should have been you. And Big Show like grabs something.
He snaps like the laptop that he has in his hand or something. And it's like,
yeah, really, really good stuff. So, I mean, a fun Royal Rumble, kind of a nice snapshot, top event for what it was to be a fan back then. It was right after Vince Russo left for WCW, and it was WWE kind of rebranding itself in a way and, presenting that, hey, The Rock is your top star. Triple H is right there with them. Mick Foley's on the way out, but we got all these other guys coming up, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, yeah, it was definitely like that kind of almost changing up the guard moment where you're getting all of these guys that would later go on to be actual legitimate, like huge superstars. Like you got guys like Edge and Christian who are going on, and both of them had singles title runs. You got Kane who was always up there, and he was always kind of like that, on the cusp. Usually a tag team guy with whoever they decide to put him with, but he does, eventually he will go on to be this huge guy, and again, with the Big Show and The Rock and, just like all of these huge, like that would later go on to be future Hall of Famers in their respective, whatever it was that they did, whether it's the Dudley Boys who are, like they're going down, and the Hardy Boys, and like all of these classic matches that we had coming towards us.
Yeah, it was really, it was a really cool time to be a fan. It leads into like one of the best years for WWE. And to think that like they had the foresight in this pay-per-view to not only plan towards WrestleMania, but to plan to make sure they set up things for No Way Out. Like now WWE doesn't even do all of that. Like it's just like all planned on Royal Rumble, WrestleMania. Then they don't really care until SummerSlam, and then maybe for Survivor Series. And that's pretty much it. At least that's how I feel, as a fan these days. So it was a fun time. Lots of really good shows in 2000. And before we do get on out of here, we did ask for your feedback over on Twitter. You can again follow me at WatchalongTommy. And I asked for your guys' feedback, and a couple of you guys were kind enough to leave some feedback. So Justin Ballard from Enougha.com was doing a really good series, kind of looking back at all the different Rumbles. I've retweeted a bunch of those on my page, and strongly urge you guys to check them out. He says, this was my favorite pay-per-view for a while. Just felt like a fresh start after the cluster bang that was the Russo era. This match between Triple H and Cactus Jack was also the match where Triple H won me over as a main eventer. Until his quad tear, he was on fire, and then sadly was never the same. That's a good point, because when he does come back from that quad tear, he's like jacked up and he's like Herculean almost, and that's kind of the end of his run there. I don't think he's ever the same in ring, and that kind of leads into the kind of reign of terror, so to speak.
Yeah, and I remember actually there was a spot where it was The Rock cutting his promo, and literally when Triple H and Stephanie come out to interrupt him, they actually mentioned that this is the reign of terror. And that's kind of weird that they, but I remember it because, it was reign of terror in, kind of in universe, because it was legitimately where it's like they were kind of running the show and they were doing whatever they wanted and blah, blah, blah. And behind the scenes as a fan, it was the reign of terror because it was Triple H always winning.
Always for
you.
you.
It's like, come on, like
they build up a hot program for WrestleMania, and then he'd beat him at WrestleMania.
Yeah, exactly.
At 5-Star Pod Wrestle, the 5-Star podcast of wrestling, a show I've been on before. Sean and Justin do a great job there. Legitimately one of my favorite pay-per-views ever. Friend of the program, Benjamin Weber at Big Pasty 21 says, Big Mick Foley fan. And I just remember the build-up for this and rewatching the match between Triple H and how I knew he wasn't going to win, but my heart wanted him to so bad. Talking Taker, which is a show that we've had Alex on doing from Talking Taker doing our WrestleMania 20 retrospective that Steve is also a part of.
Yeah.
He says, that tag team tables match blew my mind back in the day, especially Jeff Hardy's dive. Also love the King being obsessed with Taker's Ataka's face plant in the Rumble match, which we touched on there. But I may or may not have bought the DVD exclusively for the Miss Rumble competition. So apparently, I guess Alex wanted the uncensored version of Mae Young taking her top off, which must have been one of the selling points of that, or maybe you liked some of the other.
I mean, I would hope that give him the benefit of the doubt without going into it.
Yeah, more to the point there. At the Last Hope 33, new follower to Twitter there. He said the street fight was awesome. Cactus made Hunter that night, which we mentioned earlier. At Wrestling Bios, check them out on YouTube. They do a really good job. The Too Cool dance during the Rumble. Not that we hadn't see it before. That kind of pop in Madison Square Garden for a dance during the Rumble was insane. A couple other tidbits there. At WWE NXT Guy decides to leave some of his favorite Royal Rumble memories in general. Says the 1992 Royal Rumble, the 2005 Royal Rumble when Vince McMahon ran in and got hurt, blowing both of his quads, the 2008 Royal Rumble match from MSG, and then the early Rumbles where Hogan won was really cool. And, of course, when Asuka won the first Women's Rumble in 2018. From there, at Adam_Toby88, who's a friend of both of ours in IRL, said, it's got to be so he decides to share his thoughts and I guess just some thoughts of going to the Royal Rumble in 2011 that he and I kind of we went to with our buddy James. And he said the Royal Rumble of 2011 and all the surprise guests was great. The crowd in Boston was really into it. And he's right. And hopefully, in the years to come, maybe next year for the 10-year anniversary, I'll get James and Toby on and we'll do a little fun kind of look back at the Royal Rumble 2011. But any last minute thoughts here, Steve, before we get on out of here about the Royal Rumble 2000?
Honestly, I was just now because I happened to be on the Wikipedia page for the Royal Rumble 2000. I was trying to look ahead and like all of the other stuff that had happened beyond that. And I'm like thinking, okay, like obviously No Way Out and then WrestleMania. But then I'm looking like, okay, the like Backlash and then what happened on Insurrection and all these things. And I'm like, wait, that's right. Eddie Guerrero with China. So this is the Latino Heat Mamacita, like that thing with defeats S.A. Rios.
With Lita.
And I'm like, oh, right. I'm like, no, Lita didn't come in right with the Hardy Boys. What did she do right before that? I'm like, oh, right. S.A. Rios. Like,
yeah.
Wow.
Actually, are on this pay-per-view are managed by Terry Runnels, who they won the rights to in the Terry Invitational Tournament.
Right, yeah, and then like you said, you got Trish Stratus debuting with TNA, Test and Albert, and all of these stuff, and I'm like, oh wow, and then I'm like looking back, like and also the second match of Backlash was Dean Malenko and Scotty 2 Hotty,
which is an awesome match. It sounds like a silly match, but like that match is really, really good.
Yeah, it's like there's, the light heavyweight championship, and there's like the 6-man hardcore match with when they still had the hardcore belt and, all this stuff. And this was the rise of Crash Holly and the 24/7 hardcore title and all that stuff. And
how many times did we recreate the hardcore Holly running around Funtime USA? And we used to go there all the time as where we went to camp.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
So it's really, really fun stuff. And, a great look back there. Great to remember, WWF New York and everything that kind of went into that. So I think that's going to wrap it up here, Steve. Thanks so much for joining us here today, though. We really appreciate having you on.
Yeah, always.
There'll be another one of these midweek, so keep it locked here to Watchalong Wrestling. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. My buddy James will be joining me later today to record, and then we'll post it later in the week. a little bit of a retrospective of our trip 10 years ago to the Royal Rumble 2010 in Atlanta, GA. Until next time, everybody, I am Tommy on the Spot. For Steve, make sure to follow us. Oh, before we get out of here, Steve, do you want to drop your Twitter? Best way.
I'm not super active on Twitter, but it's just Steve CJ556, and then Instagram is millennial_Falcon. I think I'm 27 on that one. But you know.
Well, Steve also does join me. We do a Disney podcast as well. If you guys like Disney, you can follow us at Disney 101. That's more where we usually connect on. So
yeah, definitely
follow Disney 101 on Twitter, Disney 101 Pod, both on Twitter and on Instagram. So leave a follow there if you like Disney, and we will hope to catch up with you again sometime soon. Steve, thanks so much for everybody who left feedback, and this was a lot of fun. So thanks again, Steve.